Hello everyone, welcome to NeoStencil. Today we'll discuss how to write great answers in UPSC Mains. So every candidate who's appearing for mains has this question that what constitutes a great answer? What is the framework we should follow? What is the approach we should take while writing answers? So we'll discuss that in today's video. So let's begin by discussing what constitutes a great answer. So number one, a solid introduction. Your answer should have a solid introduction. By solid introduction, I mean we have to, follow certain don'ts. Before I tell you the certain do's, let us know what are the certain don'ts. So first is no philosophical approach. When I say no philosophical approach, it means that, for example, a question comes in the exam which is asking you to write about the recent cricket reforms, or a question on financial emergency. In that case, the introduction should not be a very generic introduction. For example, in cricket reforms, if somebody is writing that cricket is a game which is being followed by lakhs of people in India and it is the heart of the nation, such kind of introduction is something which the examiner doesn't want to see. He wants to know the facts. He wants to know, the real thing about that issue. So it would be better, if somebody starts with the answer with the facts, with some figures, with some data, or with some analysis, with some reports or findings, that would be a better approach to deal. Second thing, do not make your introduction too long. Anyways, we have limited time in the exam. There is a limitation of words also. So do not have a very long introduction, because you need to come straight to the point after writing a brief introduction. So these two things you must keep in mind. Now, what are the do's? What do's you have to keep in mind while writing an introduction? We'll come on to that part later in the video where we discuss certain questions, and we'll discuss what are those points which you need to keep in mind while writing a solid introduction. Next, stick to what is being asked. Like I said, there's a limited time. The exam is of 3 hours and there is a limitation of words, so it becomes very important to stick to what is being asked, right? So for example, there's a question, like I said, on cricket reforms. You do not need to write everything about the history, about the history of the cricket, or about what were the reforms that were taken in 1970 or 1980. No, that is not needed. It would end up wasting your time, wasting your word limit, and you will end up writing nothing that is important. So just stick to what is being asked and you should be fine. Next, and another very important thing is you need to cite reports, committees, policies and schemes wherever applicable. So a lot of aspirants have these questions in mind that, what are those important reports? So first and the foremost, second ARC. This is one of the most important reports one should always read. If you do not have time to read the entire report, always go through the summary of the report. Summary of second ARC is extremely important because not only will it help you in answering direct questions based on the report, but you will also get enough points to answer many other questions. Second, Punchy Commission. It is a very important report. If you can't read the full report, read the summary at least. It is very helpful for GS paper 2. Almost every other question you will have some further points to put in the report. Third, another important report apart from second ARC and Punchy to some extent is Sarkaria Commission report. You can just browse through the report, you can cruise through the report, no need to read it in full, but still, have the hang of those important points which are there. The fourth, and again an important report, it actually is not a report but various reports by Niti Aayog. It will help you in GS paper 3 immensely. So Niti Aayog's report, on an issue basis, Niti Aayog publishes report. Go through some of them, the important ones. We'll probably have another session on what important reports are there, which fall under the umbrella of Niti Aayog reports, and those reports you should definitely have a look at. And finally, the Bible, as they call it. It's the economic survey. You have to cover economic survey. It is advisable that you read it in full. It doesn't matter if you can't read these reports in full. You can go through the summary, but make sure that you read the economic survey in totality, because a lot of times direct questions have been asked. They would be asked again in future. And also, economic survey gives you a lot of points to write great answers in GS3. So definitely go through economic survey. Now, once we are done with the reports, another question that the students have is, what committees, schemes and policies are important? Now, see, there are thousands of committees, there are thousands of schemes, there are thousands of policies that are being published. But which ones to choose? That is what the question is all about. So see, there's a very simple thumb rule to this. You have your UPSC syllabus and there are topics that are mentioned over here. For example, in GS3, there's a topic, let's say it deals with economy, and GST becomes an important part of GS3 report. So a report on GST would become important to read. While we are, expecting a question on GST, a report on GST would become very important, because you'll have great points to write in the exam. Again, for example, in GS2, you have a topic explicitly mentioned in the syllabus, which is education. In that case, TSR Subramanian report becomes very important, right? So this is how, you should read the reports or the committees, right? So this is the approach that you can follow. Topic by topic, search for the important committee, search for the important reports, read one or two most important ones, and you're good to go. Again, the same thing holds true for schemes, right? For example, in GS3, there's a topic called left-wing extremism. So, even if a simple Google search on left-wing extremism plus government scheme would, show you a result called Samadhan. So you would know that this is one of the most discussed things in news, and you should definitely cover it. It will again help you in writing great answers. So these are the kind of, the hacks which you need to apply while referring to committees, schemes and policies, because otherwise there are thousands and 10,000s of them and you would not be able to cover them all. And finally, we come to the last part of your answer, which is a solid conclusion. Now, what is a solid conclusion? I usually recommend three things, 3 points which one should keep in mind while writing a conclusion. The first one is, either you give a way forward. For example, if a question is an issue-based question, for example, if a question is being asked on right to privacy, and what have been the recent issue on right to privacy, what was the Supreme Court's judgment on that? So you can write about the entire issue of what is being asked, and then finally the conclusion you can write the way forward, like what are the other things that should be kept in mind, how this right to privacy judgment would affect these and these and these areas, and what should be done in such a case if there is a negative impact. So a way forward is one of the good approach to write a solid conclusion. Another approach that you can follow is to give a solution. Again, there is not much of a difference in way forward and solution, but a solution would typically mean that, for example, the question talks about some problem. Let's say cross-border terrorism is being rampant across the globe. What are your views on this? Discuss. So you write about cross-border terrorism, you give certain examples, about what has happened lately. You can talk about India and its neighbors, everything. And finally, when it comes to the conclusion, you can give a solution of how to stem that problem, how to, stop cross-border terrorism. So that would be another great approach for writing a conclusion. And the third one would be talking about the present situation. If you do not have, great points on, on solution, or you do not have a good idea about how to, give a way forward, what you can do is talk about the present situation. Again, if we see the example of cross-border terrorism, we can talk about the present situation, how it is affecting the economies, how it is affecting the social strata, how it is affecting geographical boundaries. All that you can write, and that would result in a great conclusion. Now let's discuss some of the questions that were asked in this year mains exam, and we'll see what a good answer or a framework of a good answer would constitute. So let's take a question, pretty straightforward question from GS2. You must be reading Lakshmikant and D.D. Basu, the books that we usually refer for polity, and this question is straight away picked from them. Under what circumstances can the financial emergency be proclaimed by the President of India? What consequences follow when such a declaration remains in force? Very straightforward questions. Almost 90% of the candidates would know the answer. But then here comes the trick of how you can score more than the others, right? So what we would suggest is, again, first point was solid intro, right? So a solid intro in this case would be, rather than being philosophical, rather than, just reiterating what is being said in the question statement, it would be, like I said, talking about the data, talking about the facts. Here, the data is, when it is talking about financial emergency, do mention the article related with this. So Article 360. Intro should have Article 360 in it, right? So a solid intro in this case would become, Article 360 empowers the President to proclaim a financial emergency. And again, if you want to add another one line, 44th Amendment Act of 1978 implied that the satisfaction of the President in this case is not beyond judicial review, right? So just two lines. The first line talks about Article 360. Second line talks about not beyond judicial review, and your intro is done. Right. So it is a very solid introduction. The examiner would know that you know the article associated with it, you know the amendment associated with it, right? So that would constitute a solid introduction. Now, when the introduction is done, let's talk about what is being explicitly asked in the question. So the question talks about, under what circumstances can financial emergency be proclaimed? So make one heading, make your answer very visible to the examiner. So just write circumstances under which financial emergency can be proclaimed. That would become your heading. And then write, whatever the answer. It's a very straightforward, answer, that if the President is satisfied that the situation has arisen due to which financial stability or credit of India or any part of its territory is threatened, financial emergency can be proclaimed. Now everyone will write this definition, right? But what you have done here is that you have made a separate heading. You have made that visible. So it becomes very easy for the examiner to read it and appreciate the fact that, it is being written in a very sensible way, as I can put it. So that is how you have dealt with the first part, the circumstances part. Now second comes, what consequences follow when such a declaration remains in force. Again, make another heading about the consequences. You can write that one line heading, whatever you choose to. And you can write those 5 points which are directly, 3 or 4 or 5 points which are directly there in any of the textbooks. And you must be knowing them by heart because it is such a simple topic, right? So you can write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the consequences when such a declaration remains in force. Now, once you are done with this, the thing that you need to write again is a conclusion. In these kind of direct questions, writing a conclusion becomes very difficult, right? Because present situation or way forward or solution, it becomes dicey to think. But here, I'll follow that approach of writing about the present situation. Now, what can I write in the conclusion, sorry. We have seen all the points, that were written above. So a good conclusion here can be, starting with thus. So we'll write, thus during the operation of financial emergency, the center acquires full control over the states in financial matters, right? So while some experts believe that financial emergency can pose a serious threat to the financial autonomy of the states, it must however be noted that no financial emergency has been declared so far in India. So this is the present situation, right? So once you've discussed everything about financial emergency, you can write that, from the above points, it is clear that during financial emergency, center requires full controls over the state in financial matters. Again, some of the experts, they thought that such a provision in the constitution might affect the financial autonomy, but no financial emergency has been proclaimed in India so far. So you have a solid conclusion here. You've talked length and breadth about financial emergency, about the present situation, about how it affects the autonomy of the states or how it doesn't affect, and it would, fetch you good marks. Let's move on to another question and see how we can write that. So this is a question from GS3. Left-wing extremism is showing a downward trend, but still affects many parts of the country. Briefly explain the government of India's approach to counter the challenges posed by left-wing extremism. Now, most of us think that this is the question. Briefly explain the government of India's approach. While this definitely is the question, we cannot miss out on some of the words here. Left-wing extremism is showing a downward trend. Once this is being asked in the question, you have to prove it in your answer that yes, it is showing a downward trend, but still there is a problem. Now, a good introduction here is talking about what is the downward trend actually, right? So while a lot of us would not have the real data, like the left-wing extremism has decreased by this many percentage, like earlier it led to so many deaths, now the deaths have reduced to this and this level, we would not know that, right? But what we should know when we read the topic is we should read the important news or the current affairs related to this topic. And a very, very relevant news in this context was that government has removed 44 districts from the list of Naxal hit areas. So when, why would government remove 44 district from the list of Naxal areas? Only when, it sees that, okay, these are being managed well. So yes, again, then you can write, this shows that the trend that left-wing extremism is on a downward spiral, right? So in your first line, in your first intro itself, you have addressed this part, that left-wing extremism is showing a downward trend. However, then you can write, however, it is far from being over, because still there are a lot of cases. Security forces are dying, people of those areas, they are being killed by Naxals. So you can just write that one line, but yes, you have addressed the major part in your introduction itself. Now the second part, briefly explain the government of India's approach to counter the challenge. So when I told you about the schemes and the policies, and I told you that simply you can, write on Google that there's a topic called left-wing extremism in GS3. So left-wing extremism plus government scheme. The first result that would come up is this, Samadhan. Only knowing, even if you know nothing and only know this scheme or this policy by the government, you can write the entire answer, right? So Samadhan, you can read about it more. It is about smart leadership, aggressive strategy, motivation and training, actionable intelligence, dashboard-based KPIs, harnessing technology, action plan for each theater, and no access for financing. So you'll read just one line of each of these and you will get the entire answer. You will be able to write the entire answer. Now, once you are done with this, we come to the conclusion part. Again, we know we have to write a kick-ass conclusion. So in conclusion, right? In conclusion, we can write that, left-wing extremism is not only a security concern, or it is not only a security problem, it is also a social problem. Now, once you write that it is also a social problem, you can mention some of the old schemes which were there, like Roshni, right? So Roshni scheme was to, for skill development of rural poor youth from LWE district. And you can say that schemes like Roshni can go a long way in addressing left-wing extremism. Your answer is complete. You have talked about how to handle them, with the use of security forces, with the use of force, and finally you have also talked about the social impact or the social aspect, and the entire answer is comprehensive. Again, these are the points, this is what I was saying when I was talking about introduction, solid introduction and solid conclusion. Everything should be very interrelated. A good answer should, most of the times have that approach of intro, a body, and conclusion.